Hello, everyone. This week's topic is communication and cultural competency. So we're going to be kind of going over the basics of good communication skills, whether it's written, whether it's verbal, how you interact with each other, and kind of the cultural components that go along with that, and just kind of doing kind of the full picture of all the different interactions that you'll have with people, whether in the workplace or in your personal life. These are all tips that can be applied regardless of the situation you're in. So what I'd like to do today is just open with a couple reflection questions just to kind of get your mind thinking about some of the different situations that could come up. So the first question I want you to think about, kind of take the next 30 seconds or so to think about, how do you feel about your own communication skills? Are they good? Are they bad? Is it a mixture? What things do you do well? What do you do maybe not so well? What's some of the feedback that you've gotten before? And then thinking on that, have you ever run into any problems that were basically started because there was a lack of effective communication? This could be on your end, the other person's end. Maybe it was a mixture of two or more people at fault, and maybe it was a game of something like telephone. What situations come to mind where maybe there was a problem, but that problem could have been avoided entirely if there had just been a little bit better communication among everyone who was involved? After thinking of those previous examples, kind of looking forward then, what challenges do you think you might face using communication in the career that you're trying to go to? Maybe it's a whole new field that you've never been in before, so you're not sure what to expect. Maybe you have a good idea of what it looks like, but you haven't got to practice it. Or maybe it's something you've already been doing, but you're just getting an official certificate to kind of advance your career. What are the challenges that you'll face, either personally, in the workplace, and how does communication come into the picture? How can you prepare yourself for that? Taking a look at this quote from Maya Angelou, uh, it says, "People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel." And so, as we talk about communication with others, it's important to not just focus on what you meant or what you said, but also how that was taken by the other party or people that you were trying to communicate with. So we're going to take a look at a bunch of different things in our communication styles in hopes that when you communicate with others, not only are you saying the right things, but doing it in a way that they can feel valued and respected in the way that you communicate with them. All right, so what we have here is kind of the first step to good communication is actually listening. So there's kind of 6 keys, I would say, to being a good, what's called active listener. Well, first is paying attention. Don't be distracted. Give your full attention to what's there at hand. Two, when you're hearing and listening, withhold judgment. So you're just trying to understand what they're saying from the perspective that they are saying it. You're not trying to ascribe any moral or right or wrongness to it. You're just trying to understand what they're saying the way they meant it. Third step then is to reflect on what they said and kind of start processing what that meant. If there's some things that you're having trouble understanding or think were poorly explained, this is your opportunity. You could clarify. Hey, you said this, I'm not sure I understand what that means. Or this came across this way. Is that what you meant? Uh, Summarizing is always good, So kind of taking everything that was said, whether it was written or verbally, and kind of repeating it back in a short bullet point version. So what I hear you saying is, or what you want me to do is this, this, and this. Is that right? And so kind of condensing down to the core ideas. And then once you've done all of that, you've checked with the other person and clarified what they meant, summarized what they were trying to get at. Then, think about, hey, who else needs to know this information? And how can I share it with them so that, the communication keeps going on and doesn't stop at me? Some of the best ways to kind of understand where your listener is at is through nonverbal communication. So when you are communicating with someone, pay attention to these things that are unsaid. What are some clues that you think when you're talking to someone you could notice to see if they care about what you're saying, or maybe that they don't care about what you're saying? What sort of behaviors, body language, gestures, without even hearing something that they say, how can you tell if they're interested or care or not? Some examples might be if they're slouching in a chair, if their eyes are focused on anything other than you in the room. It could be swaying side to side. It could be looking at their watch. All of these things kind of communicate that they may not be interested in what you have to say. Some good things then to keep in mind is whether you are doing communication or someone else is communicating with you, is to keep these kind of 6 items in mind. You know, good communication involves eye contact with whoever's talking. I know for some people that is a little more uncomfortable than not, but in a lot of professional workplaces, making eye contact with the person you're talking to is a good sign that they have your full attention and that you're here for whatever they're trying to say. Gestures, just be aware of your body language, that gestures you're using are appropriate for the workplace. Thumbs up is always a good thing, to confirm with whatever you're saying at the same time. Personal space. Different people have different ideas of what a good or respectable personal space is. If you stand really far away from someone, they might think you don't want to be around them. If you stand too close, they might think you're weird or strange. So understanding that people have different ideas of personal boundaries and just kind of trying to pay attention to what those are and maybe some other cues that other people have when they communicate with other people, what that proper distance is. Posture is important. Are you slouched? Are you looking maybe too relaxed? Are you really stiff and uptight? Maybe have clenched fists. Think about your facial expressions too. If you often look mad without intending to be, that's going to change how people perceive you, even if that's not true. So just kind of thinking about that and kind of like the personal space aspect, physical contact, handshakes, pats on the back, tapping someone on the shoulder, or if they think something's funny and they're kind of joking with you. Everyone has different ideas of what is appropriate or not. So always, I would say, err on the safe side if you don't know the person well. Here you can see, a random comic slide that one of my coworkers found. So it may be a little overstated. You've probably heard it time and time again, but being on your phone or just paying attention really to anything else when someone else is there and you're supposed to be engaging with them or listening to them communicates a lot, even if you don't say anything. Looking at your phone shows that has your attention, not whoever's there in the room with you. And if what they're saying is important, It's also saying, hey, not only do I not respect you because you're not worth my time over whatever's on my phone, also, I don't care about what you have to say either, and I don't think it's important. A lot of times in a workplace, if you're going to have supervisors or other people you work with, they might not take that so well. When you're on the phone, when they're giving you instructions for the day, like think of the message you send when you would rather look at your phone than them. You can think of about with your significant other, with family members. What messages are you sending to the other person when you would rather ignore them and look at your phone and give that your full attention rather than the person that you're trying to communicate with in that instance? So we're going to do another reflection exercise. So thinking on feedback that you've gotten from other people in the past, what are some of your downfalls? What are some of the things that get in the way of you specifically and being a good active listener? Each of us have strengths that we have, weaknesses. And so for some of us, certain aspects of listening, like paying attention or hearing something, is going to be easier. Maybe we don't talk much in the first place. For some of us, maybe we're good at seeing two sides to the story. So not being judgmental or making judgment values based on what someone says is easier for us. What are the things that is difficult for you to do when you're trying to be a good active listener? Here is one of the tools that we can use to see if you're effectively communicating. The 7 C's are control. So how are you controlling your language, your body language, how fast you're talking, the tone that you have? Your emotions are under control. Control the dynamics of the situation or the room, even the location the conversation is happening. Those are all under that control. Keep it conversational. So try to be relational, try to have a back and forth as much as possible with whoever you're communicating with. Try to keep it open and approachable. Try not to be defensive, even if they are verbally accusing you of something that you may have not done or that is unfair. Try to address what is going on through a conversation that is respectable. Be confident. So if you're soft spoken or maybe not very strongly assertive, try to say what you have to say like you believe it, that you are willing to back up what you say. And mimic that with your body language. Stand upright, make eye contact. Don't speak too softly if you're very soft spoken. Competent. So not only do you have an idea that you're communicating, but that you can back it up, that you can give examples for whatever it is, that you can follow up on it. Show that you're able to back up whatever conversation piece you have. Being calm when you approach the situation is going to lead to better outcomes. People react to kind of the energy you bring to the situation. And if you're calm, it's more likely to have a positive outcome because they're not going to be defensive. They're not going to see you wound up or upset or sad. And so they kind of don't respond based on what they're seeing from you, because being calm isn't something that we as humans feel like we need to have a gut reaction to. So how you approach someone else makes a big difference in the starting of that conversation. Being clear. Are you getting straight to the point? Are people able to understand you the first time you explain something? Go state exactly what you need and when you need it, and don't beat around the bush. So be concise, get straight to the point, and if people want to ask to elaborate, then they can follow up with you. So far, we've been talking about being an active listener in the form of communication, and now we're going to move on to actually communicating verbally. So it's usually the main way that we communicate with each other, but these might sound like some situations that you've come across. I know what they said, but I don't know what they meant. Or I know what they said, but I don't like what they meant. And so those are situations that arise very frequently. We're going to talk on some ways that we can try to avoid those situations from ever even happening. When talking to someone else, consider the tone. Are you being loud? Are you being soft? Are you being sarcastic? Are you trying to make a joke? No, the way you say something can give an impression that maybe not everyone also picks up on, but there are some social cues that people might take to mean whether it's a joke or whether you're being serious. How fast are you talking? Is it easily understandable? Are you speaking maybe a little slower than you need to? And, you know, are you putting emphasis on how slowly you say something? What is the language you're using? Is it formal? Is it informal, like you would with a friend? Or are you using like a lot of slang or language like that maybe people get, or maybe they don't? What is the content? What is the things that you're talking about? Are you using lingo from like specific phrases or acronyms from your workplace? Are you using cultural references that kind of you have to know to get what you mean when you say it? Are you talking about topics that might mean different things to different people, like politics? Or are you using certain phrases or words that you know uh, with the individual you're talking to may elicit a certain response from them when you use it? And maybe you should use that more or less depending on that situation. Some other tips for verbal communication is using a strong and confident speaking voice. Some of you, it might take some practice, but be confident, be clear in what you're saying so that everyone else can hear you clearly. Avoid filler words like you know, be clear and concise. So get to the point. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And a big tip that I still use today is if something is really important, you're in an important meeting, or there's some things that you definitely want to say to someone, but you're afraid that you might forget or leave some things out, write some bullet points, bring a piece of paper, put it on your computer. However you're talking to them, bring a short list so that you know that you're covering everything that you wanted to cover during that conversation. Moving on to written communication then. Uh, Keep it short, keep it to the point. It's going to make writing your notes out easier. Don't rely on the tone. Don't use sarcasm over text. It generally doesn't work well. And always double check something before you send it out to someone else. Proofread it because once it's sent, usually you can't take it back and can lead to some awkward situations. If writing isn't your strong suit, there is a free tool. The one that I'm most familiar with is Grammarly. You can install it. It'll look at things that you type out on most programs that you use on the computer and give you suggestions of better ways to write things. And so it's a really good tool if you want to learn how to practice maybe writing better, more professionally. So why written communications? It keeps a record that you can look back at later. That's the biggest positive to writing things down. You can verify whether you had a conversation, what was said during that conversation, and if it's through a computer like email, you're going to have an exact time and date when that transaction occurred that you can always reference if needed. I definitely recommend using written communication when you have important verbal confirmations or conversations, and you can follow up with it and get it in writing as well. So anything talking about promotions, confrontations you've had at the workplace that maybe need to be documented, important job duties or information that you need to clarify or ensure that you're doing properly, um, making sure that you're doing due diligence to do the best you can. And anything if someone asks you to do something unsafe or unethical, saying, hey, maybe putting it in writing, say, hey, I know you asked me to do this. I just wanted to make sure that this isn't an issue. So that way, if someone else needs to be involved, you have kind of a track record of them asking you to do that in writing. When it comes to writing on a job, generally speaking, start out as formal as possible until you kind of get a good feel for what's going on in the job and kind of how other people communicate in their notes and their email with each other. Sometimes it's person by person. Sometimes it's, certain companies are more formal or more informal in how they communicate with each other. So, be formal when you first get at the job, kind of observe and see how other people communicate, and then try to kind of go with the flow and see how they're doing things and kind of mimic that. We're going to move on to kind of the last aspect of good communication, and it's what is culture and how does that play into the conversations that you have? So one of the definitions we can use for culture is that it's the accumulation of a shared pattern of values, attitudes, roles, assumptions, and behaviors that help us function in a particular context that we find ourselves in. So really, it's just kind of a combination of all of these different things melding together that kind of influences how we behave and how we react to things going on in our environment and each other. Another thing to keep in mind is that while you have your own culture, everyone else also has theirs, and it's interwoven into their lives as much as yours. Culture is interwoven into you and the people that you surround yourself with. So none of us are immune to the effects and ideas that each culture holds, and that sometimes when these come together, it might create some difficult situations. We'll take a look at this next slide here of all of the different possible cultural aspects that might influence how we think and interact with each other. So as you take a look at kind of this cultural iceberg, there's different things that are more readily visible to other people and yourself than other things. Things like age is probably one of the first things that people can kind of tell about you. And with that, there's a culture that you're part of a certain generation. You're Gen Z, you're millennial, you're Gen X, you're the baby boomer. So there's a bunch of cultural assumptions and ways that people are generally raised that are associated just by what age you are. But as we move down, there's things that are less visible, things like family traditions. What is important in what talents are valued in your family and in your communities? What is your perception on religion? What social status do you have? Whether it's income and relationships or connections. There's cultural things that come from that. What are your views on politics? What are your attitudes on, showing up to a party? Do you show up on time? Do you show up early? Do you show up late? And how rude is it considered if you do one of those things? Each cultural body group is going to have a different idea of what those things are. This might not be obvious unless you specifically go out of your way to try and maybe ask someone about that. But then again, sometimes asking could be considered uh, either a good thing or maybe taken poorly. So there's a lot of things going on in all of our lives on attitudes, assumptions, and the way we deal with things that are going on all the time. And we can only see a few of them up here at the very top. So it's important that when you have interactions to kind of keep in the back of your mind, hey, there's probably more to this interaction than I'm aware of. And so, what are some of the other things that could be factoring into this interaction that I'm having? So, with all of that in mind, try to think of the first time that you realized that your family, or maybe a group of friends and support network valued something that was different from another family or support group. How did that interaction happen? What was your thoughts, gut reaction, your emotions to hearing something that was what different from what you've experienced or what you placed priorities on? And how did that conversation go? Also reflect on, maybe later in life, a challenging situation that happened. And then after maybe sitting on it or after time had passed, you kind of realized that that situation, the main reason it even was a challenge in the first place, was because there was a cultural difference in expectations that may not have been spoken during that interaction. So those conflicting values, cultures, expectations kind of came to a head and created a situation that was difficult or uncomfortable. How did you realize that's what happened in the first place? And how did you use that maybe to inform how you handle similar situations that might come up like that? So again, as we practice active listening, as we practice good verbal and written communication, and we also practice cultural awareness, what do you bring to the table? What are your cultural values and assumptions? Some people know some of them, but if you haven't really sat and thought about it, what are the things that you bring to any interaction? What are the values and assumptions that you have of other people based on your culture? When you're interacting with different groups, how do you actively work against your stereotypes of different groups of people? It's very hard to not have those stereotypes thrown at us through social media, conversations, and our brains are wired to make difficult, complex things as simple as possible. And that's where these stereotypes come in. And if you're not careful, you're going to label everyone with a stereotype that is not giving them, the true justice and scope of who they are as an individual. So how do you work against your brain's default mode on stereotyping people? When you're facing an abrasive encounter or an uncomfortable situation with someone who might be culturally different from you in one way or another, how can you reflect on what happened without judgment? So you can make a judgment later, but in that situation, how are you doing your best to just absorb the information and try to put the pieces together of what's going on without assigning right or wrongness to that situation? Taking that step back and say, hey, what's really going on here? And what might be at play that I haven't thought about before? And then reflecting on that and then moving forward with how you want to respond. How do you go out of your way to learn more about the different communities and cultures around you? What are you doing to improve yourself or gain more knowledge about different kinds of people so that as you interact with people at the workplace, in your personal life, friends of friends, how can you have a more rounded, balanced approach and hopefully healthy approach to interacting with those people and having good communication with a wide variety of different situations and practicing that critical thinking and that practicing that open-mindedness and just trying to absorb how things might be perceived from different groups of people. What I would like to suggest is something called the Platinum Rule. Many of you may have heard of the Golden Rule, which is to treat others as you would want to be treated. But after thinking on our conversation on culture and how you want to be treated might be very different from how someone else might want to be treated based on values, assumptions, and things of that nature, I would suggest maybe thinking about treating others as if they want to be treated, which takes more legwork on your part to kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes. So knowing what you know of the other person, maybe the things that they value that you are aware of, how would you want, how would they want to be treated by you? And so start thinking in all of your interactions, not just what you would think is normal or you would think is the best way to handle the situation, but maybe thinking, taking that step back and say, this is how I would want to be treated, but is this how they would want to be treated? And maybe you don't know the answer to that. So do some work. Try to get to know them better. Instead of just making that blanket assumption that everyone's the same, do the thought exercise. You may not get it right, and that's fine, but always be in that continual learning mode of like, how do I approach this? And, what can I learn about someone else today? And that'll take you a lot farther than just saying, oh, everyone's the same and there's the one way that everyone likes to be treated, and that's how I'm going to do things. Because that's not true. And so start practicing that, start doing that thought exercise, and you'll be surprised to see kind of what you learn about yourself and other people as you go forward in life.